e4, King's Pawn Opening, opening line. The King's Pawn opening move is both popular and logical. It controls the center, opens lines for both the Queen and the Bishop, and usually leads to an open game in which tactics, rather than slow maneuvering, predominates. e5, King's Pawn Game, opening line. Black responds symmetrically, making a direct challenge to the central squares. Knight f3, King's Knight Opening, opening line. With the possible exception of 2f4, this is the most logical second move against Black's symmetrical answer to the king pawn. The knight attacks e5, clears the way for an eventual castle, and rests on its best defensive square. Knight c6, Queen's Knight Variation, opening line. Now, when White plays 3 Knight c3 instead of the Ruy Lopez, it's the three knights game, a leisurely system. Bishop b5, Ruy Lopez Spanish, opening line. This is the Ruy Lopez move. It is designed to maintain long-term pressure on Black's center. If driven away, the king's bishop will take up a position at b3 or c2 to focus on a king's side attack or on the central squares. Knight f6, Ruy Lopez Spanish, Berlin Defense, opening line. The Berlin defense was common at the turn of the century at the highest levels of play. The intent is to take advantage of the exposed position of the white bishop in some variations, but it usually leads to cramped positions in which white has more options. Castle kingside, Ruy Lopez Spanish, Berlin Defense, opening line. Knight takes e4, Ruy Lopez Spanish, Berlin Defense, open variation, opening line. Rook e1, out of opening book, d4, would have been in the Ruy Lopez Spanish, Berlin Defense, open variation, opening line. Attacks Black's knight at e4. Knight d6, moves it to safety and threatens White's bishop at b5. Knight takes e5. White wins a pawn. Material is even. Bishop e7, enables the short castle. Bishop f1, moves it to safety. Knight takes e5. Rook takes e5, pins Black's bishop at e7. White wins a knight for a knight. Material is even. Castle kingside, frees Black's bishop at e7 from the pin. d4. Bishop f6, threatens White's rook at e5. Rook e1, moves it to safety. Rook e8. c3. Rook takes e1, pins White's bishop at f1, skewers White's queen, and attacks White's queen. Queen takes e1, frees White's bishop at f1 from the pin. White wins a rook for a rook. Material is even. Knight e8. Bishop d3. d5. Bishop f4. g6. Knight d2. Knight g7, takes the knight away from the edge of the board. Knight f3. Bishop f5, attacks White's bishop at d3. Bishop takes f5. Knight takes f5. Black wins a bishop for a bishop. Material is even. Queen e2. c6. Rook e1. Knight g7. Bishop e5. Bishop takes e5. Knight takes e5. White wins a bishop for a bishop. Material is even. Queen d6. Queen f3. f6 threatens white's knight. Knight d3 moves it to safety. Rook e8. Rook takes e8 check, checks black's king. Knight takes e8, protects black's king. Black wins a rook for a rook. Material is even. Queen e3 threatens black's knight. King f7 removes the threat on black's knight. Queen h6 attacks black's pawn at h7 and blocks black's pawn at h7. King g8 protects black's pawn at h7. Queen e3 attacks black's knight. King f7 removes the threat on black's knight. Queen h6 attacks black's pawn at h7 and blocks black's pawn at h7. King g8 removes the threat on black's pawn at h7. Queen e3 attacks black's knight. The game ends in a draw.